All right. Thank you, Dennis. My name is David G. I'm a grateful, recovering alcoholic with a sobriety date in Alcoholics Anonymous of August 8th of 1994. I'm also a grateful member of SA, a recovering member with a sobriety date in that program of October 1st, 2019. I'm excited to be here to share experience, strength, and hope with the Big Book. I appreciate you guys coming out each Sunday and allowing me to be a part of this. It has very much enhanced my recovery over the weeks that we have been doing this. You know, we've really been looking into the Big Book pretty in depth, and we've been looking at it almost like in the first person. It's kind of the way I do whenever I sponsor guys through the Big Book. We go through and we see how to have a personal experience based off of the information given. You know, we've been looking at this chapter more about alcoholism, and it talks a lot about the insanity that precedes the first drink. Now, insanity, I think, is such a word that is so misunderstood sometimes, especially by us when we first come here. One of the things that I thought coming in was, you know, man, I know I've done a lot of crazy things, but don't tell me I'm insane because I'm not. But if you look up the word sanity in the dictionary, then it just, you know, it's a lack of wholeness. Sanity means wholeness of mind, so it's a lack of wholeness. My sponsor and mentor, Charlie, used to tell me all the time, he said, David, I take a piece of pie, I cut that pie into 11 pieces. You come by, I give you a piece of it. He said, it's no longer whole. He said, it's less than whole. But he said, the deal is that there's still 90% of it left. He said, you know, someone else comes along, I give them a piece, it makes it 80%. He said, so it's less than whole. He said, but it doesn't mean that you're all gone. It just means that you're not all there. And insanity for us, in taking a look at this in the book, is that our mind convinces us that it's okay for us to take a drink or it's okay for us to act out when our experience absolutely shows us something different. So we know that insanity is the lie that we believe prior to acting out, prior to taking a drink. And the book up to this point has given us examples. It talked to us about the man of 30. It talked to us about a man named Jim. And it showed us the story of the jaywalker. Now it's brought us to the story of Fred. Now, Jim absolutely was a low-bottom drunk. Jim knew that he was in a hopeless condition. Now, as we take a look at Fred, we're going to see that Fred was somewhat different. Fred was a high-bottom drunk. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic. But in either case, whether we're low-bottom when we get here or whether we're high-bottom, it really doesn't make any difference. The problem is the insanity shows up. We believe the lie, no matter what our race, color, creed, or experience is. We believe and act on that lie, and when we do that, we fall into relapse. And this happens over and over and over. So the book is showing us that insanity is what our problem is. Remember page 23 in the Big Book at the top, it said the main problem the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. So we're going to take a look at this man Fred today, and we're going to try to put ourselves in this story to see if some of this has happened to us. And I'm quite sure we can probably see ourselves here as we travel through and take a look at the mind of Fred. So we're going to start right there on page 39, and we're going to start where it said Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, and he's happily married and the father of promising children of college age. Now, there's a lot of us probably on this call today, or those that are listening to this call, who fit that category as well. I know that a lot of that's my experience as well. It says he has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it is Fred. To all appearance, he is a stable, well-balanced individual, yet he is an alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of the jitters. Now, it was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Now, I don't know about you, but I know about me, and whenever I first come to AA, and most definitely whenever I first came to SA, it was the first experience. Well, the one that had been discovered, it was the first experience of that kind, and I was much ashamed. So I'm already starting to connect with Fred's story. Now look at what he says. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. We meet a lot of nerve resters in Alcoholics Anonymous and Sexaholics Anonymous. The book says the doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. Now, for a few days, he was depressed about his condition. I don't know about you, but I know about me. And usually after I've been on a run with either alcohol or acting out sexually, usually whenever I begin to sober up, I'm pretty depressed about my condition. That seems to be one of the symptoms that we look for. The book says he made up his mind to quit drinking, or in some of our cases, acting out altogether. Now, this is usually what happens. It never occurs to us that perhaps we cannot do so. In spite of his character standing, Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic. So right there, the book tells me that Fred would not take step one. So unlike Jim, he took step one. Fred just absolutely will not believe himself to be an alcoholic. And if I don't believe I'm an alcoholic, if I don't believe I'm a sexaholic, this next sentence isn't going to apply to me at all, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem, which is step two. If I don't need step one, then I definitely don't need step two. The book says we told him what we knew of alcoholism. So they told him about the physical allergy. They told him about the mental obsession. They talked to him about the phenomenon of craving. They told him about step one. Now, Fred was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms. And that's kind of how I was when I first started learning about my sexaholism. I conceded I had some of the symptoms, but I was far from admitting that I had all of them. He says, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. Now, Fred was positive that his humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. Now, I think I've tried that on a lot of different occasions. I don't know about you, but I know about me. And I've definitely felt if I read enough, if I prayed enough, if I went to enough meetings, if I just done this or I just done that, the more knowledge I got, the better it would be. I've come to learn that I can't think my way out of this. In fact, the deeper I think into it, the worse I get into it. The more that I read, the more self-knowledge I get. It seems to make it worse every time that I relapse. And that's been my experience over and over. So the book says we heard no more of Fred for a while. That's usually how we are. We get a little bit of knowledge. We get a little bit of sobriety. We relapse. You hear no more from us for a while. But the book says one day we were told that he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky, and he soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced that he had to stop. He had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Fred was in a pretty hopeless condition. I think a lot of us can relate to that. The book says, let him tell you about it. Here's what Fred said. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. Now, I've come into the program. I've worked a few steps at times. I've got a little on the other side of guilt and shame, and I felt pretty good about myself, and I absolutely did not believe it would be able that I would act out again. I had that experience happen to me in 2018 when I came to my first SA meeting. I sat and I listened to you wonderful people share your experience, strength, and hope with me. I walked away from that meeting believing that it would absolutely be impossible for me to ever act out again. In less than a year, I was in worse shape than I'd ever been in my whole life. The book says, Fred says, I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink. And I think that's what we need to pay attention to more than anything else in this book when it talks about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink or the first bout of acting out. It's always the insanity that precedes it. There again, the insanity is going to give me a lie. My problem is I'm going to believe that lie. I'm going to act on that lie. And then I'm going to drink. I'm going to act out whatever it is I do. He said, but I was confident that it could not happen to me after what I'd learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. I felt that way after my first meeting. He said, I felt, anytime I see those two words, I felt, there's something in me that's starting to set up a lie. He says, I felt I have every right to be self-confident, that it would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. Now, I believe that a lot of times myself. But we want to pay close attention to that because we're going to come back to it as soon as we get to the next page. Keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business. For a time, all was well. He said, I had no trouble refusing drinks. I can remember that happening for me. I can also remember being able to refuse clicking on the internet and doing the other things that I was doing at that time. For a time, all went well. And this is kind of what I started thinking, the same thing that he's going to think as he talks about in this very next sentence. I began to wonder if I had not been making too hard a work out of a simple matter. I can remember texting that to my sponsor one day. I was relapsing with lust over and over and over, and I just could not stop. And I got a few days of freedom there for whatever reason. I can remember texting him one day and said, you know what, I think I've been making too hard a work out of a simple matter. And just a couple of days later, I was on a run one more time. So Fred says this, one day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I had been out of town before during this particular dry spell. So he really didn't have sobriety. He just had a dry spell. In AA, we call it a dry drunk. He said there was nothing new about that. I like to pay close attention to this right here. Physically, I felt fine. When I came into AA, one of the things that they told me is that this was a feelings disease. If I would get in touch with my feelings, then everything should be okay. But as I look at Fred's story, that doesn't seem to be the case, because physically he felt fine. Neither did he have any pressing problems or worries. His business came off well. He said, I was pleased, and I knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. Fred is absolutely on top of life. Everything seems to be going good. I don't think I drank, and I sure don't believe that I act out because of my feelings. I just don't believe that today. He says, I went to my hotel and I leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind. Now look how quick that insanity hit him. The thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, nothing more. The insanity has hit his mind. It has told him a lie. He's believing the lie. He's going to act on the lie. And let's see what's going to happen to Fred. I ordered another cocktail. Now he's got it in the body. The physical allergy has taken over. We've talked about this physical allergy for weeks. Now it's in the body. The mind in the body has him. So here's what happens. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me that a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. And I've had one on many occasions that led to more and more and more. He says, I remember having several more that night and plenty the next morning. Not only does the obsession have him now, the craving has him as well. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York, of finding a friendly taxi cab driver at a landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went, what I said and did. Then came the hospital, the unbearable mental and physical suffering. And I know that many of us here can relate to that. Whether we went to the hospital or not, there always seems to be a lot of mental and physical suffering connected with this disease. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. It's kind of strange how the disease works in my life. As soon as I have a relapse and I'm able to regain my ability to think, then I carefully want to go over my evening. I don't ever try to do that prior to that, whenever I'm not into the recovery process. So look what he says. Not only had I been off guard, if you look almost directly across the page to the left, he said it was only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. We don't have that kind of defense. Over here, he said, not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. And this time, I had not thought of the consequences at all. And I think that that happened to me with lust and a lot of other things that ended up bringing me to my bottom. Fred said I commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered. Kind of strange how I will remember that now. I couldn't remember any of it before, but I can always remember it after. He says, I now remember what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come. I would drink again. They said, though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Just that did happen and more. For what I'd learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge could not help in those strange mental blank spots. And I think that is so important for us. You know, I know that as a recovering member today, you know, I'm very grounded in that 10th and 11th step. I know that those are the two things that I try to keep a watch for all the time, because if not, it's strange how my mind will take me to a place. I mean, I can absolutely be having a wonderful experience with God. Things seem to be going good in my life. And just like that, my mind comes back and it will feed me a lie. And if I'm not in a good spiritual place, I will believe that lie. I'll begin to act on that lie. And it's just, in a short time, I'm worse than ever. The strange mental blank spots he talks about, I've had a lot of those through the years of my sobriety. He said, I've never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. It looks to me like Fred's beginning to accept the first step here. 2 members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much. I hate that whenever you guys come to me, you talk to me, you got a grin on your face. You seem to be happy with life, and I'm as miserable as I can be. He said, they asked me if I thought myself an alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. And I can remember when coming into SA this time, that was the question that was asked to me. And that's the question that I asked most of the guys that I sponsor today. Do you feel like you are really licked this time? Because if you're not, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you're an unwilling person. And I don't really want to go down that trail. So if you're licked, if you're willing to do this deal and be all in, I'm all in with you. If not, then best of luck. And I've had to say that to a lot of people just here recently. But look what Fred said. He said, I had to concede to both propositions, so he's accepted it now. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as I'd exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. There's step 1. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process of the work that we're going to be going through over these next several weeks, this process will snuff out the last flicker of conviction that I could do this job myself. All right, so we've looked at where he had taken step 1. Then they outlined the spiritual answer. We know today that that's step 2. In a program of action, we know that that's 3 through 12, which 100 of them had followed successfully. There's our promise. If I want to succeed in this program, once I accept the devastation of my condition, once I accept step 1, they outline the spiritual answer in this book, and I take the program of action, I'm sure to have the experience they had. He said, though I'd been a nominal churchman, that's pretty irrelevant to this. It doesn't matter. Their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, and this is what I see with a lot of guys that I work with today, the program of action, talking about steps 3 through 12, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It's kind of hard to take a close look at ourselves and to unravel so much of that in the 4th step, and then to confess that to somebody in the 5th and the 6th and the 7th, taking a look at that work, and then doing steps 8 and 9. It's pretty drastic. But I think here's the greatest thing that happened to me, and it took a long time for this to happen. It says it meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. There's a set-aside prayer that we use here, and it's a beautiful prayer. And it goes something like, God, please set aside everything I think I know. And if I break that down, if I stop right there and take a look at it, I really think I know something, especially after I've been into recovery for a little while. I've been to meetings. I've read the book. I've heard people share their experience on the book. So I think I know something. But the prayer asks me to set aside everything I think I know about God, about myself, about the program, about living life, and especially about spiritual matters, so that I can have an open mind for a new experience with all of those things. And that's a prayer we use a lot as we go through this work in the big book. So he said it meant he would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. Fred said that was not easy. I've been born and raised in the South, and down here it's the Bible Belt. I tell you, it's been a tough place to grow up and to get any kind of rational idea of God. So to come in and to throw some of the lifelong conceptions that I learned from that has been pretty hard, the same way that Fred talks about that here. But look what he says. He says, the moment that I made up my mind to go through with the process, in other words, when he decided I'm going to any lengths to go through the 12 steps, look at what happened. Fred says, I have the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. What a beautiful promise. I love this part of the book right here, because Fred says this: quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all of my problems, not some of my problems, not just my lust problem, not my drinking problem. The discovery that spiritual principles will solve all of my problems is probably one of the greatest promises that I've been able to find in the book. Fred said, I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one. For me, that's kind of a sick statement to even make, even though if I look at it materially and the things that I was doing as far as my job and stuff like that, yeah, it was probably by no means a bad one. But if you look at everything underneath that, the lust, the drunkenness, the craziness, my old manner of life was anything but a good one. It was very much a bad one. So, but look what he says. I would not exchange its best moments for the worst that I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. In other words, Fred don't have a choice anymore. He is convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that his condition has been relieved, as in fact it turns out to be. So it says, Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He had only felt the first nip of the ringer. Look at this sentence real close. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. Now, it doesn't say all alcoholics, but it says most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. And I find that to be true here. That's why I asked the guys, are you absolutely willing to go to any lengths? So my question to myself is this: do I have the power? Can I solve my problems by myself? My head says, yeah, we can do this. My experience says absolutely not. I'm going to listen to my experience rather than my thinking. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff member of a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As the two of you men whose stories I've heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless. There's step one. Apart from divine help, step two. Had you offered yourselves as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you if I would have been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have a profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, not all, there again, most, there is virtually no other solution. And that's what it was told to me. If you have any other solution, then that's something that you need to try. You need to be absolutely convinced there is a solution, and it is outlined in the 12 steps in this book. So he says once more, it's almost like as if he hasn't told us enough in these prior 42 pages. He's going to say, once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. In other words, I don't have a choice. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. Right there for me, whenever I got to that point in the book, that posed a problem. Because what had happened to me in church, by the time that I was 8 years old, I had turned away from church. I felt like I had turned my back on God, and I was certain that God didn't want anything to do with me. Now, I don't know if the message they gave was the message I heard, but when I was sitting in the pew as an 8-year-old boy, I didn't hear a whole lot about a loving God. I heard a lot of hellfire, and I heard a lot of brimstone and all that kind of stuff. I'd heard them say one day, it's not only if you do these things, you're going to go to hell. If you even think about these things, you're going to go to hell. So I felt like I was going from the start. Now, I can remember one day acting out at a very young age, and I had thought about it. I had acted on it. So I waited a few days. I thought, man, that's it. I'm going to die. I'm going to go to hell. That experience didn't happen to me. So I felt like they were lying to me. And I began to live my life, the rest of my life like that. So whenever I come into Alcoholics Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, and you tell me that I have to find a loving relationship with a God of my understanding, I come in here and try to do that based on what I knew as an 8-year-old boy. that doesn't work very well for me. So when I look at insanity and I look at the way that the disease lies to me, it sets it up in my mind. I believe the lie, I act on the lie. Then the deal is, if I'm insane, then there's only one answer for me. It has to be saneness. So they told me in the first step, if you're powerless, then obviously the answer is power. If insanity is what's driving you to act out, then the answer has to be sanity. Both of those words can be found in the second step. It says we come to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That's what we're going to be looking at as we move on into next week. One thing that really caught my attention about the second step, I thought, I do believe in a power greater than myself. But really, that's not what the step's asking me. The step says we come to believe that a power, not in a power, that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. That changes everything for me. So in the first step, I learned that I was powerless for two reasons, not one. Once I start, I can't stop. And once I stop, I can't stay stopped because I've got an insane mind that always shows up and I act out again, again, and again. My life is unmanageable, not because of everything I've lost, my family, my home, my career, all that things. It's because of this hole that's on the inside of me, and absolutely nothing can fill that up. So once I'm able to see that, we move into there is a solution. Then I start to see that how the insanity works on my mind. Am I able now, since I know what the definition of insanity is, am I able to take a look at that and say, the way that I have believed and the way that I've acted about a loving God, which I never really knew, am I even willing to give that a shot? So Bill, in the very next chapter, is going to present to us a way to take a look at some of our old ideas. We're going to look at those things, and he's going to give 3 different exercises in the chapter to we agnostics. And I think once that we look at those and we take a really close look at that with our experience and see, has this served me very well up to this point or has it not? If it hasn't, then it's something that I need to become willing to let go. For a long time, I didn't even know they were there. Today, I do. I've been able to disregard some of those old ideas. The new ones have come in and taken its place, and I feel in a better place, in a closer contact with the God of my understanding that I've ever felt, probably in all of the 25 years that I was in the program prior to coming to SA. It has been the greatest thing that's happened to me. The bottom that I hit a year ago, almost a year ago, October 1st, God willing, will be 1 year in SA. And it's, I tell you, it has really brought me to a deeper level and a deeper understanding of the God of my understanding. I credit that, of course, to God, but also to a lot of men that are on this call, and especially my sponsor. He has helped me with the meditation process. That's turned out to be a beautiful experience. And it's, I absolutely know today that the insanity that once ruled my mind on a daily basis, it no longer has the power to do that. Now, if I let up on the spiritual program of action, I promise that's going to come back, and it will very much do that. But the book says as long as we continue to do what the instructions that we're given to do here, it says this is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. So for me, that's what I have to do on a daily basis, not only to stay sober, but to begin to recover from a state of mind that was out to kill me to begin with. So I'd like to stop right there for this week. I'd like to start on the chapter 2, We Agnostics Fresh next week. And I know it's a little bit early, and I apologize for that, but I think it would be really good for us to start the chapter at the front of the chapter and not already be into it. So I really thank you for giving me the opportunity to share. I was able to go away to the Ozarks with my wife this weekend, and for the first time, we both talked about how freeing it was that I was absolutely able to be present with her during that whole time. I was able to feel the nearness of my Creator. What a beautiful experience that turned out to be, and I owe all of that to you guys, to the program, and most of all to a loving God. So thank you very much for letting me share this week.